But if I may just start the discussion rolling, I wanted to ask you, how do you see the roles of port cities like Singapore, Rotterdam and Shanghai? Here I'm using the word port cities in a very general term itself, but I know you made a point about distinguishing between the two, which is equally important. How do you see the roles of these cities with ports changing in the course of the next 10, 20, 30 years? Will the rise of Asian port cities in China, India, and to some extent in Southeast Asia resemble those of Europe, North America? And do you envisage port cities becoming more similar in form and function with the globalization of seaborne trade? And do you see shipping itself shaping the ports, or the port shaping shipping?
Well, thank you, Andrew. That's some very interesting questions. The first one about the role of specific ports. You mentioned Rotterdam and what was the other one? And Shanghai. Yeah, I think the key here is to mention the role of cargo. There's a difference between cargo ports which are sitting in a cargo area and ports which are basically entrepot. And I think Shanghai, Rotterdam, both are predominantly cargo ports, and you see that when you visit Rotterdam. They have a different perception of the world. They are very much about the port, and that's where they make their living. But then you have other ports which have a role which is more to do with the shipping services element. Lesser, I think there's many cargo ports, and the cargo ports go from small to large, and they form the framework of trade and always will. The shipping centres, which are both ports and maybe not ports at all, I mean London is not really a port anymore, those are the ones that provide the services to the shipping industry. And I think in that case, we have, for the reasons I mentioned, a changing global framework. And I think the role of the ports providing the services is going to develop perhaps slightly differently, but in a complementary way to the way the cargo ports will develop. And if we do move towards the sort of framework of global trade, which I was arguing makes sense, then I think that we could be looking at one or two super port cities which actually take a leading role. The difference between a port city, the port's responsibility in a cargo state is to its own national cargo requirements. That's what it's there to help. The service ports have a responsibility for actually, to some extent, providing the shipping industry with the infrastructure it needs to do its job. And I think that's a different executive responsibility and a different focus as well. Not just the ship owners, but the cargo owners, really. So that's my long answer to your short question. The second part of that question was
in relation to whether shipping will shape the ports, or the ports will shape the shipping. And in particular, I think you mentioned the powerful advent of information technology in terms of knowledge management, and of course that part is going to play a bigger part in the narrative itself. But at the end of the day, you're still shipping, in the case of container liners, yes. Boxes.
Yes, I think I think they both have significance. I mean, ports influence shipping, and in the same sense that if you take the hub concept in containers, that was the product of a group of big companies that decided they preferred to run the business that way. That was their strategic decision. And so in that particular case, in some ways, the shipping industry moulded the ports. But in other cases, if the Chinese decide to build a lot of ports to handle cargo, then that will, and the sizes they choose and everything else will influence the shipping industry from that perspective.